Trump public policy leading into Biden public policy. I'm sure the short answer of that is we're totally screwed. But for the fact that everything was so weird in 2020, it would be quite normal for an incumbent president with an economy in shambles to lose re-election. Was that the basis of your prediction?
Well, remember, I predicted that Trump would be a one-termer from the day he was elected. In fact, a lot of people were saying that he was going to be the new Ronald Reagan, and I said it was more like the new Jimmy Carter, only with the political parties reversed, because Carter came to office when the economy was weak and promised to make it better. He was going to be an agent of change. He was an outsider. He was a peanut farmer. He wasn't part of the Washington establishment. And so the electorate turned to Carter. And then, of course, Carter simply continued the failed policies of Nixon, Johnson. And so things got worse. And then the electorate made a turn in the other direction and went to Ronald Reagan. And, Ronald Reagan was far too right wing to be elected before Carter. But things got bad enough during Carter that the public was willing to try, a different type of Republican than, the Rockefeller type Republicans. And so I said the same thing would happen in reverse with Trump, that Trump would come into office promising to drain the swamp and make America great again, but that he would fail miserably because he would simply continue the failed policies he inherited from Obama, which are the ones that he inherited from Bush. And that when he ran for re-election, the economy would be in worse shape than when he took over, which was the case, despite all the hoopla about the booming economy under Trump. It never boomed. All that boomed was the debt. We borrowed more than ever before. We had the biggest trade deficits in history, the biggest budget deficits in history, even before COVID made them worse. But the whole thing was a fantasy. I mean, all we had was a stock market bubble. But the underlying trends continued to stay in place. And so all of the bad things that was happening, all the things that Trump criticized as a candidate, all that continued. And remember, as a candidate, he talked against the Fed. He called out the Fed for cheap money. When he became president, he wanted money to be cheaper than ever. He was the biggest cheerleader for the Fed, not the biggest critic. He only criticized them for not printing enough money. And so I knew that the economy would be worse after 4 years of Trump, and that when Trump ran for re-election, a lot of the Reagan Democrats that came back to vote for him, the blue collar guys in the Midwest who were tired of all the lies from the Obama administration or the lies from Wall Street, and they knew that the economy was not good. And now Trump promised to change things, and so they voted for him. I knew that after 4 years, when they were in even worse shape than they were before, that they would not buy into that false promise again. And so I always expected Trump to lose. And, those expectations were met. And in fact, not only did Trump lose, but the Republicans lost the Senate. So now the Democrats have not only the White House, but they have Congress.
So I noticed that the governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, and the mayor of Chicago are suddenly discovering that locking down their economies is really bad, and there's really no evidence that lockdowns were preventing the spread of the virus. And this seems to coincide with the incoming new president. And I wonder, was there ever a time, say, pre-lockdown, where you were thinking that Trump might actually squeak by because the economy was looking okay? It wasn't looking great, but it was looking okay. But clearly the lockdown sort of sealed his fate.
Well, actually, COVID may have given the president an excuse to kind of blame everything on COVID. And it might have given him, get out of jail free card on the economy because, hey, it's not my fault. Everything was great. And, COVID is the problem, So he may have even lost worse if it wasn't for COVID. But COVID is the excuse that keeps on giving right now. I mean, the politicians love it because it's now used to justify all sorts of socialist programs. In fact, a lot of people want COVID to continue. There are a lot of people that don't want to go back to work. They'd rather just collect unemployment checks that in many cases exceed what they used to earn when they actually had a job. And most people prefer leisure to working. So if you can get paid more not to work than you earn when you do work, you have all these people that don't want to go to work. And the government is making that possible. And now you have all these states that were broke and municipalities. Now they have an excuse. Now we need all this government money because, COVID's not our fault, right? This is the big thing. Nothing's anybody's fault anymore. So everybody gets free money from the government because it's not their fault.
I think it was a couple days ago you were talking. Well, it was right after the Senate defeat in Georgia, where Trump came out after legislation had essentially been finalized, saying, "I want $2,000 checks for everybody." Now there might have been an argument for instead of spending the $1 trillion that they spent primarily on expanding government, they might have reallocated that money. But at that point, it couldn't be done. So he kind of set up Republicans as the bad guys that wouldn't give out even more free money.
Yeah, I mean, that really stabbed some Republicans in the back because now he put them in the position of having to deny the checks. And that, of course, allowed Biden to frame the Georgia elections as a referendum on those $2,000 checks. Vote Democrat, collect $2,000. Vote Republican, don't collect $2,000. So for most voters, that was an easy decision to make. I'd rather have $2,000 than not. And so basically it was a bribe. Vote Democrat and we'll give you $2,000. And, I've been saying on my podcast, if you give the voters a choice between two Democrats, they'll pick the Democrat every time. And, the Republicans tried to get into a bidding war with the Democrats on who could promise the most free stuff. And the Republicans can't win that election. Once the Republicans accept the false premise that government has all this free stuff to divvy up, they've lost the race. Republicans have to, tell the truth that the government has nothing. The government doesn't have any money to give out. It only has what it steals. It can only give to some people if it takes from other people. But the problem is a lot of times it gives and takes from the same people. A lot of people don't realize that while the government is giving the money with their left hand, they're picking their pocket with their right hand. And in many cases, the government takes more money away from you that you can't see than it gives you that you can see. And I think the way a lot of this is going to manifest itself over the next 4 years is going to be in a rise in cost of living. All the money that we're printing, so these $2,000 checks don't bounce, right? So all these people who no longer produce, they don't help provide services, they don't produce goods, but they get money from the government and now they go out and spend it. The cost of living is going to go through the roof. Everything that Americans buy is going to be a lot more expensive. And that means people are going to buy less stuff because they can't afford it. And that added cost is a government tax. That is the price Americans are going to pay for bigger government under Biden.
So I know you talk about this a lot, but it's worth reminding people, and I know people that watch your show or my show probably know this already, but there's only 3 ways to spend money you don't have if you're the government. You can raise taxes, you can borrow, or you can print more money or expand the money through the expansion of credit. You talk a lot about the second and third and the negative impacts that has. And Trump didn't seem to care about any of that stuff. A lot of people sort of compare him to the Tea Party, but to me, he was sort of the anti-Tea Party in the sense that he didn't care about the budget, he didn't care about the debt, he didn't care about the Federal Reserve and all of this transfer of wealth that happens when we expand the money supply, which makes him, it's sort of like, this is going to sound hyperbolic, but it's Keynesianism on steroids, much like you would see in Venezuela.
Yeah, Trump came to Washington to bury the Tea Party, not to praise it. He was a false prophet. I said that from early on. He claimed to be a conservative, but he's not. He was a populist. He railed against socialism, but then he advocated socialist policies. I mean, he really, for all the talk about how bad Obamacare was, he loved Obamacare. He just wanted to rename it Trump Care. I mean, that was all Trump was branding. He rebranded NAFTA, the USMCA. He didn't really change the deal. He just put a new label on it and then pretended it was the greatest trade deal ever, even though it was substantively the same as the worst trade deal ever.
Before we continue, help us by smashing that YouTube like button and subscribe now to this channel. This shows the algorithm that you value the information, and it helps us spread this message. Sharing is caring. Please like and subscribe now. Thank you. And now let's continue.
The whole trade war with China was a bunch of nonsense. Trump made government bigger. He signed every spending bill that hit his desk. You had to go back to like 1880 to find a president who served a full term who vetoed fewer bills than Trump. So he was a rubber stamp for the swamp. You can't drain the swamp if you're not cutting off the revenue to the swamp. Yes, he took credit for cutting taxes, but he ignored the fact that he made government bigger and more expensive. So we didn't get that government for free. We still had to pay for it. He just pretended that we didn't. So, Trump, the worst thing I think that Trump did is he moved the Republican Party so far left that he gave room for the Democrats to go socialist and not appear to be out of the mainstream. I mean, the socialist parties and the Democrats are no longer seen as radical because of how far left the Republicans have moved. Now, because Trump is now considered far right. How is that far right? He's a big government guy, and now he represents the far right. He represents the smallest government can get. Somehow he represents fiscal responsibility, and no, I mean, he really hurt, I think, the party by destroying what it supposedly stood for. I don't know what the Republican Party stands for now, and Trump was so popular within the Republican Party. And what really bothered me is so many Republicans pretended that the Trump economy was great, so they could take credit for it, as if Trump's policies were the reason that the economy was so good. The economy was never good. It was just a bigger bubble. And it was the Fed that was more to blame for the bubble than Trump, because the Fed monetized all those deficits in a way that pushed up stock prices and real estate prices and made everybody feel richer. And so we can go deeper and deeper into debt. But the actual problems that Trump inherited got much worse. And now we're going to have to deal with the consequences.
So my friend Justin Amash tweeted out, I think it was a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, where he documented the process. We've been picking on the executive branch. We've been picking on Donald Trump. Let's pick on Republicans in Congress for a while, because what Amash documented was the process of taking away the voice of any member of Congress that wanted to offer amendments or alternatives to this massive omnibus. We're going to jam everything into these massive spending bills, and you can either vote yes or no. And it was actually Republican speakers, Paul Ryan and John Boehner before him, that created this sort of mega powerful speakership. And Nancy Pelosi was like, well, thank you. I'll run with that. And I can't tell the difference. I had Rand Paul on my show a couple months ago, and he was sort of criticizing, maybe even making fun of his colleagues for drawing a line in the sand in the Senate. They were not going to spend more than $1 trillion in unpaid for COVID relief, or whatever you wanted to call it. It all went to government. It didn't actually go to people. And that was the new normal, that they were only going to spend $1 trillion. And now, Joe Biden's coming forward with $1.9 trillion. I think it's sort of comical that we're expecting Joe Biden to offer a different vision for America's future, and he's basically offering just more of the same. This is what we've been doing all of 2020, is just spending trillions of dollars we don't have.
Yeah, look, I pointed out on my podcast, the minute the Republicans offered $1 trillion, they lost the debate. The minute you concede that spending borrowed money is a good thing, well, then you've already lost the argument. And if spending $1 trillion that you don't have is good, why isn't spending $2 trillion better? They needed to make the point that we shouldn't be spending anything. In fact, if you really want to stimulate the economy, the way you do that is cutting government spending, not increasing it. Because once you understand that the government only has what it takes out of the economy, then you recognize that government spending is a burden on the economy. It's a burden that the economy must bear. Now, when the economy is strong and everything is good, well, maybe we can afford the burden. But when the economy is struggling, then you want to lighten that burden. Then the government needs to free up resources back into the private sector. Hey, the private sector is struggling. We've got this pandemic. What can government do to help? Well, let's find a way to ease the burden. Let's cut back on our spending. So maybe we can lower taxes, or let's take some of these regulations that are just unnecessarily running up the cost of doing business. Let's get rid of those regulations, because businesses are struggling. They didn't do that. It's like, let's make government bigger. It's like you got somebody trying to run a race, and, they've already got a pack, full of weights on it. And you think, well, let's put some more weights in the pack. Maybe that'll make them run faster. No, get rid of the weights that are already slowing them down. But once the Republicans said we want $1 trillion, that was it. It's over. They had no way to win.
So by my count, I may only need one hand to count the number of consistent fiscal conservatives in the House and Senate. Maybe a few new ones like Nancy Mace, who just got elected. We will see what she's doing, but there are no fiscal conservatives left in Washington.
No, and look, any that are there almost look like hypocrites because they were not making that much noise when Trump was running up the deficit. So how do you now criticize Biden without being a hypocrite? It's very difficult. So what put the brakes on Obama was the Republican Congress in 2010 and the Tea Party. And, Obama would have spent a lot more had it not been for some of the pushback of the Republicans. That's not going to be there. I mean, that's the reason I talked about Trump being a reverse Jimmy Carter, because after Jimmy Carter, we got Ronald Reagan, right, who was far more free market oriented than Nixon or Ford, right? He wasn't a Rockefeller Republican. He was a Goldwater, right? And the country rejected Goldwater, soundly earlier, but then they embraced Reagan, who was really to the right even of Goldwater. Well, that's what is happening in reverse. I think what we're going to get with Biden is even further to the left than what we had with Obama. And I think even if Biden himself wasn't as big a liberal, the Democratic Party is so much further left. I mean, I pointed out that I thought the most significant aspect of the 2020 race or the 2016 race was not that Trump won, but how well Sanders against Clinton in the primary, and the fact that the Democratic Party had moved so far left. And now you've got the rise of AOC and the Squad, and this is really where the Democrats are beholden to that wing of the party. And I think they're really going to be driving the legislative agenda. And what's going to be empowering them is going to be the idea that everything is free. The Republicans have already established that precedent that deficits don't matter. So if they don't matter, they don't matter. So Green New Deal, so health care, for everybody. Forgive all the student loans, free college for everybody, universal basic income. Everybody can have whatever we want because everybody's entitled to it. It's a right. It's a human right. And, who knows, reparations, whatever. But all this stuff's going to be paid for, which means by a printing press, which means none of it is paid for. And we're going to destroy the dollar. And we're in for, a currency crisis, a dollar crisis, potentially hyperinflation. And, Americans are about to experience economic destruction on a scale never seen in the United States.
What to do in such a situation? Inform yourself and keep your financial education strong. We from the Compact Group offer our loyal subscribers a free educational portal with first-hand monetary, financial, and economic knowledge. Enter our invite-only Insider Club by clicking the link below. You will get access to first-class information far earlier than the rest. We have prepared a special deal for all our members where you can access a giant pool of Robert Kiyosaki's financial wisdom for just $1. To find out more, simply click the link below and join our Insider Club absolutely free. But there is more you can and should do. Build up several streams of income. More and more people realize that they have to take their future in their own hands, but they don't know how and where to start. We from Compact offer our Insider Club members unique opportunities. Strengthen your financial muscle and get the edge. Click the link below. Become part of our free Insider Club. No financial obligations. But there's one important thing you have to know. You have to become active. So do it now. Become active and see you on the other side.